folks, and welcome to Film Spectacle. I'm Spec, and today I'm going to be talking about the 2006 film The Pursuit of Happyness. And no, I did not misspell happiness, because our main character sees this word painted on his child's daycare wall, and it's spelled with a Y instead of an I. So there. Now that that's out of the way, I will be spoiling this movie from here on out, so here's your warning. The Pursuit of Happyness stars Will Smith, Jaden Smith, Tandy Newton, Brian Howe, James Cairn, Kurt Fuller, and Dan Castellaneta. Yes, the voice of Homer Simpson. It's directed by Italian director Gabriel Muccino, written by Steve Conrad, and based on the biographical novel of the same name by Chris Gardner. It's 1981. Chris is working as a portable bone density scanner salesman, married to Linda, a hotel maid, and they live with their soon-to-be 5-year-old son, Christopher, in San Francisco. Between daycare, rent, and taxes being due, they're living paycheck to paycheck, a common American experience in 1981 and to this day. She's been working double shifts at the hotel for 4 months now, and he needs to sell at least 2 of those scanners every month in order to pay for rent and childcare alone. Needless to say, this causes a lot of tension in their marriage, as economic struggles often do. But after seeing the success and perceived happiness of stockbrokers in their natural habitat, Chris learns about an internship for a job that could change their lives for the better. The job is for a stockbroker firm, Dean Witter Reynolds. Every 6 months, they conduct interviews and select 20 people for an unpaid internship. And at the end of that internship, one person will get a job at the firm. Chris is beaming with excitement and tells Linda, who instantly cast out about him getting the job. She's been let down too many times by Chris, and she lets him know it often. The next day, while out trying to sell a scanner, Chris meets a partner at the firm, Jay Twistle, and after convincing him to share a cab across town, Chris impresses Twistle by solving the newest and hottest puzzle to hit the market, a Rubik's Cube. And as the elation from this encounter hits, so does the reality that the cab fare is over $180, money that he does not have. So Chris bolts from the cab with his scanner, is actively chased down by the driver, gets onto a BART train to get away, but loses the bone density scanner in the process. To avoid getting evicted for 1 more week, Chris agrees to repaint their unit for his landlord for some new tenants. And while painting, he receives a knock on the door by police. So the night before his big interview, Chris is booked into jail for unpaid parking tickets. The next morning, Chris gets out of jail and makes it to his interview, dried paint on his face and all. But despite his appearance, his encounter with Twistle in the cab, and solving the Rubik's Cube, plus a quick-witted joke to the partners and that Will Smith charm, Chris lands a spot on the internship. Now he has to commit himself for the next 6 months to an unpaid position with no guarantee that it will lead to an actual job, while he's still working as a scanner salesman to keep a roof over his head. And to make things even worse for Chris, Linda decides to leave him and moves out. Chris is evicted from the apartment, so he moves him and Christopher into a motel, and Linda then decides to move to New York for a better job opportunity, leaving just Chris and his little son. And with the mishap of losing his last scanner, and then a letter from the IRS informing him that they'll be seizing $600 from him in unpaid taxes, Chris now has only $21.33 to his name. And now he can't even pay for the motel. Finding their belongings outside and themselves locked out, Chris and Christopher are left to spend the night in a BART station bathroom because they have nowhere else to go. It's a gut-wrenching moment, and I'm not going to get into the nepotism discussion in today's video, but I have to say, the sincerity and rawness of the performances from both Will and his real-life son Jaden in this father-son movie dynamic is really beautiful to watch, in my humble opinion. And I'll just leave the nepotism talk at that. So now, Chris is at the internship during the day, rushes to pick his son up from daycare, then hops on a bus to get to the homeless shelter by 5 to have any hope of having a safe place for them to sleep that night. Welcome to a glimpse into the life of being homeless. After a few months of living like this, Chris comes upon a homeless man with the scanner that he lost. He gets it back, and after selling blood to scrap up some cash to get it working again, Chris repairs it, sells it to a doctor's office, and that night he treats them to a hotel room for the cleanest, most comfortable and private night's sleep they've had in months. Meanwhile, at the internship, a desperate and determined Chris is taking few breaks, studying for the stockbroker license exam, and cold calling all day without even hanging up the phone in between calls to be as efficient as possible. And unlike the Ivy League trust fund babies he's competing with, Chris needs this job. So finally, a call is picked up and a potential client can meet with him in 20 minutes. Chris starts to book it across town, and running into some more bad luck and traffic, he misses the meeting and has to pay the city for a parking ticket. But the next day, Chris, along with his son, goes directly to this potential client's home, apologizing for missing the meeting and wasting his time, leading to them all going to a 49ers game together. They sit in box seats, Chris schmoozes, and little Christopher gets to escape the life of being homeless for an afternoon of pure childhood fun. So hopping between the internship, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, then back to the internship again, Chris is nearing the end of the 6 months. He takes and passes his exam for his stockbroker license, gives one of his last $5 bills to a partner for cab fare, and has managed to reel in 31 clients to the firm during his time there, more than any other intern. He's brought in front of the partners on the last day, and the moment he has been hoping, grinding, and praying for has arrived. He's offered the job. He picks his son up from daycare, gives him an extra big hug, and they walk down the streets of San Francisco in a triumphant ending. That feels good, doesn't it? He got the job. That's all he needs, right? My first thought is maybe there was a sign-on bonus and he got paid that week. But that would be best case scenario. More likely, his first paycheck was delayed a couple weeks, so they would still be homeless until that first paycheck hits. You see where I'm going with this? I have some issues with our happy ending here, because having a job is not the same as having a home. And this ending of ours certainly frames it that way. And you don't have to take my word for it. A simple Google search into homelessness statistics in the good old USA, and you will find that 40 to 60% of homeless Americans are currently working. But our story of Chris is based on a true rags to riches, a favorite hero journey for capitalists. Chris gets the job in the stock market, ends up becoming a millionaire and owning his own firm, writes a memoir, then that book is made into a movie starring Will Smith, with him producing. This is a Cinderella story, not a reflection of the actual homeless experience in America today. Most people living in homelessness aren't aiming to become millionaires like Chris. They simply want a home, a roof over their heads, a dignified place to sleep, eat, and breathe out of the elements of this world. And this ending of framing homelessness around unemployment only feeds into the stigma of homelessness, that these people just need to work harder, pull up their bootstraps, and just stop being homeless. But it's really not that easy. For starters, this movie is set in and was filmed in San Francisco, one of the top cities in the country for homelessness rates, and one of the most expensive cities to live in. Now, I'm not a betting woman, but if I were, I would bet that the film crew had to work around homeless people while filming this movie, clearing them from the background of shots. And if it's anything like how other cities in California deal with homelessness before hosting big events like the Oscars, the Super Bowl, or foreign leaders coming to town, homeless encampments are swept up by police forces and trash trucks so that the homeless problem can be swept under the rug and out of the way. You see, it ruins the aesthetic. We don't actually want to solve homelessness, we just want it to be gone. And as of this summer, the Supreme Court in Grants Pass versus Johnson has just ruled that local authorities can act even more aggressively towards people sleeping or camping in public, with San Francisco and other major cities eyeing criminalizing homelessness so that they can throw them in jail. And being the greatest country on earth that we are, the homeless population has grown every year over the last 6 consecutive years in America. Go us. The Department of Housing and Urban Development estimates 653,000 people, over 100,000 of which are children, are homeless on a given night in America as of 2023. So that number will be even higher in 2024 with things being as they are. So when I see the triumphant ending where Chris lands the big job, I'm happy for him. But then I wonder, what about all the other homeless people? The ones he was just standing in line with at the soup kitchen and the shelters? What about them? You see, solving homelessness is not like a Rubik's Cube. It's not a puzzle. There is, in fact, a very easy solution. And here's where we need to move outside of our American propaganda bubble and see how other countries are doing it. Finland has discovered that by giving homeless people homes unconditionally, their homeless population is going down, and it's led to overall better outcomes. In Cuba, the homelessness rate is so low because state housing is readily available, rent is capped at 10% of one's income, and they even provide lease-to-own options for state housing to residents. Yes, communist Cuba, living under American sanctions and decades of trade embargoes, has less homeless people than the great US of A. Now let's talk about China. China, in May of this year, announced a 300 billion yen, the equivalent of 41.5 billion US dollars, that will be spent on public housing. You see, China had a problem with homelessness and substandard housing, so they decided to start fixing it over the last several years. So taking inspiration from Singapore, they began investing in building public housing units all across the country. These units cost as low as 10,000 yen, or roughly 1,500 US dollars, and in some cases, units were given away to people living in substandard conditions. Their new plan that was just announced even allows local authorities to buy unsold homes that they can offer as affordable housing to the public. Compare that to the latest US headlines. During record heat waves, homelessness is now being criminalized across the country, all while more people are going homeless because of inflation, a brutally expensive housing market, and the fact that the minimum wage is not enough to survive on in a single state in our country. We are currently paying tax dollars from our hard labor every day, only for those tax dollars to be primarily spent on our $2 trillion war machine. We spend far more on police budgets and putting people into the prison system, and now we have cop cities being built all around the country, even though we have the highest rate of people behind bars in the developed world. Priorities, though, am I right? So in the end, what all of this boils down to is we have two solutions for the homelessness crisis. The capitalist solution is to ignore it and rely on homeless shelters, which chronically fill up and cannot house every homeless person. And when ignoring the problem starts to ruin our aesthetic, then capitalists want to throw homeless people into the prison system to milk them for cheap labor for corporate America. The communist solution to the homelessness crisis is to spend our tax dollars developing and building public housing all across the country and giving homes to those who need it unconditionally. It really is that simple. So now we have to ask ourselves what it means to guarantee to every person life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Capitalism provides no guarantees on these things. Every person on this planet has to meet certain needs for survival before you can even begin to think of pursuing higher needs. Without these basic needs met, you and your nervous system are living in pure survival mode. We see glimpses of this in this movie. Chris has outbursts of anger towards other poor Americans from the stress of needing money just to survive another day and having no guarantee of where him and his son will sleep that night. My heart is racing from anxiety just thinking about it. And some of the most heartbreaking moments in this film are from little Christopher. He sees his father on constant edge, flipping easily into anger, and he's just along for the ride, trying to make the best of it, but his nervous system is also in constant survival mode. And again, over 100,000 children, like little Christopher here, don't know where they will sleep on a given night in America. So Pursuit of Happyness, with a Y instead of an I, is not necessarily necessarily a favorite film of mine, but I can't think of another movie that shows how easy it is to become homeless in America, the toll it then takes on a person, and worse, their young children, and how it takes a Cinderella story to ultimately get yourself out of this survival mode in the richest country on the planet. But it really is easy to solve this problem. The powers that be have simply decided it's not a priority to take care of fellow Americans when rock bottom happens. And trust me, that is all by design. We need to break out of our conditioning of individualism, this pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. Because at the end of the day, how do you pull up bootstraps when you have no boots? How can any person pursue a life of happiness without their basic needs met first? The answer is they can't. So here I am telling you that there is a better way. But first, you have to open your eyes to the propaganda, open your hearts to your fellow human beings around you, and make a conscious decision to fight for a better future from here on out. But anyways, that's all for today, folks. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying things over here, and stay tuned for next time.